In the Eastern view, which might be thought of as a mental monism, everything is mind, in which case matter is an emergent property of consciousness. From that worldview, which from the Western perspective, we look at that and say, well, they didn't develop cell phones and video cameras, so it wasn't a very good worldview. But another way of looking at it is that they're actually interested in other things. They're interested in diving deep inside consciousness, as opposed to shooting out and being objective and explaining the world from an external point of view. What is happening within the past decade or few decades is that Western science has been listening to some of the claims of Eastern science about the nature of consciousness, taking advantage of 3,000 years worth of internal study. And among the very first things that are described, for example, in meditative practice is that if you begin to meditate, your body becomes calm and your mind becomes calm, and it has health consequences. So the neurosciences have begun to study this and finding that it's true. So that's interesting. So then you can say, well, what else does Eastern science say about the relationship between mind and body when you start diving in deep? One of the next things that it says is that there are elements of what we would call clairvoyance or psychic phenomena, the siddhis in the Eastern sense, that you bump up against when you start to realize that this idea that consciousness may be more fundamental than matter or energy, that is one of the things that comes out. Your internal experience starts to bump into clairvoyance. From a Western perspective, this is not acceptable because we don't know how brain and mind can separate, and which seems to be necessary in order for a mind to go out somewhere to find something that is not accessible to the brain. Nevertheless, Eastern science says brain and mind are not the same, in which case clairvoyance and precognition and all these other siddhis are possible. Well, Western science has looked at this for about a century. It looked at the possibility that mind and brain are not the same, and has come to the conclusion, based purely on the empirical evidence, that there are aspects of mind that don't seem to be tightly bound to the brain. In which case, you can say there's another notch for the Eastern science approach, namely that Eastern science said, well, mind-body effects should begin to change the mind and body if you start to meditate. That's true. Some psychic effects appear to be true using Western methods. Well, what else does Eastern science say? Because what we're talking about are the very elementary stages of the Eastern approach. If you keep following out on Eastern lore, you find things at some point of mystical union with the entire universe. At that level, the report is, the reports across cultures and throughout history, that the universe is not the meaningless object that Western science says that it is, but rather that the universe is permeated with meaning, and it is saturated with consciousness. There's consciousness everywhere, in which case, while the Western viewpoint is your mind, your awareness is locked inside this structure, in the Eastern viewpoint, this structure is actually the entire universe, and you can experience it like that. So Western science has not quite gotten to the point yet where it's able to verify that that's the case, but I think the signs are very clear that that is becoming an interesting question, and methods are being developed in order to take Western science and move it along this continuum to begin to verify in Western terms what the mystics have been talking about for thousands of years.